And welcome to the Public Safety Committee meeting this morning. We have two items. The first is going to be Bill 1721, which is Police Community Informed Police Training, and Ms. Wellens is going to lead us through that one. And the second one is the update on the crime statistics, and Ms. Farag is going to lead us through that. I did, as we begin, obviously Council President Albernaz is on this committee. Council Member Tom Hucker is going to be joining us. I guess he is joining us, so I won't say anything about him then, if that's okay. No, Council Member Hucker is joining us virtually. We're being joined by Council Member Will Jawando, who was the original sponsor, or one of the original sponsors, I guess, of Bill 1721. I did want to welcome Chief Jones here, and if they'll please come to the table, who's ever coming to the table, Assistant Chief Darren Frank, and then we have a new person here. And he's not so new to Montgomery County. He's been here for several generations, but Acting Assistant Chief Nick Augustine is here as well. So, Assistant Chief, we're going to give you the round of applause. This is your first grouping to be at Public Safety. So, and with that, if everyone can please come up to the table. Who's coming up to the table? Oh, and then, yes, and then we have, well, we'll see who's coming to the table from the college, but Captain Ian Clark from the Montgomery County from the Police Department, Steve Greenfield from the Dean of Business Information Technology and Safety, Workforce Development and Continuing Education. They could have come up with a nicer title than that. I'm just telling you up front. It's a little catchy. Dr. Sanjay Ray, Dr. Eric Benjamin, Interim Vice President and Provost from the Rockville campus, Professor Ginger Robinson, who's Department Chair for Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminal Justice Department. And then Lee Holland, I did speak to him this morning. He cannot make it, and he's sorry that he can't make it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, and before I do, does anybody on the committee have any, or not on the committee, have anything to say? Okay, and with that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, council members. This is work session number 3 regarding Bill 1721, Police Community Informed Police Training. There were 2 prior extensive and in-depth work sessions regarding potential partnerships between Montgomery College and the police department in connection with implementing some aspects of this bill. And at the most recent work session, there was some discussion in particular regarding the requirements of the bill, the concept that the community-informed police training required under the bill would be provided during the police academy as a prerequisite to field training, but not as a prerequisite to joining the academy. We have received, and it's in your packet, it should be at the end of your packet, circle 48 has the most recent updates on the progress report from Montgomery College and the Montgomery County Police on their collaboration. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you first want to hear from the panelists in terms of if they'd like to, provide an brief oral summary of the update.
Yes. I would, and whoever is going to begin, Assistant Chief, when everybody points to somebody else, I know if that's a good thing or not a good thing. That's collaboration. Yes. But
no, this is collaboration.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, we appreciate being here, council members. I'd like to report we're making very, very good progress on this effort. I think it goes hand in hand with what Chief Jones and I have been looking at doing with our academy and with the education of our young officers before they go out onto the road. The partnership that has started with Montgomery College has been fantastic, and I actually think it's going to open up some more opportunities. I'm happy to say that we believe we're on track, provided no speed bumps in the way. We believe we're on track for putting this program into effect in the spring of 2023. So we have a class currently in session now. Right now, the The short version is the staff at Montgomery College is looking at a lot of what we already do in the academy, looking at the different ways we cover racial equity, social justice, health and wellness, community policing, policing history, active listening and conflict resolution, along with civic engagement. So those are the areas that the program's looking at. They're looking at what we already do, and they're going to take that and craft their program for what's going to be a 30-hour Capstone Project. We appreciate that you've listened to us about not having it before they start the academy. While we have made gains in our recruiting efforts, again, thanks to efforts by you and the county executive, pay raises was big, and there's other things that we're working on. But anything that stands in the way of getting the best candidates, and we just felt having that as a prerequisite really caused people to want to go to another jurisdiction, especially because it's so easy to choose any other jurisdiction between hiring bonuses and starting pay. So, plus also, I think in addition to that, why it makes sense at the end is they get a lot of tools in their belt during the entire program, right? We teach them about defending themselves. We teach them about being guardians. We teach them about how to do community policing and how to de-escalate situations. But then at the end of it, when they have a chance, after they've graduated, they can take a breath and they can really reflect on all of the information they've gotten over those weeks and be able to put it into a new sense before they actually go and deal with our citizens that may be in need and that are in crisis, and what it means to them, what it means to our community that they act in a fair, equitable, responsible way. So we're very pleased with where we're going, and with that, I want to turn it over to our friends with Montgomery College.
And can I, before, in 1 second.
I apologize, sir.
No, which is fine. Can you tell us how it's going to work for, I don't want to hold up anybody from being on the street. I mean, that's a concern. I mean, I haven't spoken to my other people on this, but that's a concern. So how is the timing going to work on this?
So it's going to be an addition of a week to the academy, and we have been looking at increasing the time anyway. As far as the class goes, we're still going to start a new class. They're going to be out on their own and not in the academy, so that's not going, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. They're not going to be on their own. They're going to be in this academic world over here that's separate from the academy staff. We're going to have academy staff there, but Montgomery College staff is going to be deeply involved with that. So we'll be able to continue to start our academy classes in a responsible way that matches our recruiting cycle and matches when kids get out of college, or we see that they're readily available. So it's not going to delay it, and it's not going to delay it to a great degree. I think 1 week is on top of all the things we give them is a good price to pay to make sure that we have very thoughtful officers, reflective officers that hit the road in the best mindset possible.
Okay. Thank you. Please.
Good morning. I bring greetings from my president, Dr. Jermaine Williams, and Montgomery College is very pleased to be part of this conversation, and we thank you for your ongoing efforts on this bill. These kinds of efforts makes Montgomery County a national model for social justice, equity, and inclusion. Our faculty are experts, they're practitioners, they're academic experts, and they have been working collaboratively with our colleagues in the police department. They have made significant progress in that area, and we stand ready to collaborate and deliver professional development and training for new recruits, and also ongoing professional development for police department. And also we have hundreds of students in our criminal justice program. They are from our community. They represent the demography of our community. They will be ideal police officers for our community or state of Maryland or anywhere in the nation. So while we are engaged in this conversation on training, we are also preparing future leaders, future police officers. So if you like, I can ask Professor Robinson to give an update on where we are with the present training effort.
Please.
Thank you.
Please, thank you.
Thank you, council members. I think Assistant Chief Frank was absolutely right. We have made tremendous progress with the 30-hour training program. There's also a complementary cadet program on which we've worked significantly as well. Our faculty have done a fairly extensive review of the training materials that already exist and are provided to police officer candidates in the academy. Currently, we are working on curriculum development, review of materials, of instructional delivery methods, of assessment methods, of identifying community partners who may be good folks to help supplement the instruction that's brought in, because as Assistant Chief Frank referenced, we do intend for this to be community informed and highly reflective. Officers will have graduated from the academy with an extensive amount of knowledge regarding the issues that are faced by residents of Montgomery County. But until they have an opportunity to engage in that safe space guided by academic professionals, by subject matter experts, to engage in dialogue and to engage in project-based practices of these principles that they've learned, they're not quite ready to hit the streets and be the kinds of police officers that we would like them to be. So we think that, you know, the Montgomery County Police Department has incorporated several pieces of very important, curriculum into their academy, but we're looking to do something complementary that supplements what the officers are already given. So they really are those 21st century, transformative police officers who engage in positive ways with the community.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Joando. Did you?
This is really nice to hear. I appreciate all the work that's been done. I looked at the date I just couldn't believe it's been like a year and a half, but that just shows how hard you've been working on this, and how important and thoughtful you've been in the approach. So I just want to thank you for that. I wanted to mention one thing and give you the chance to respond. I know we'll get there, Ms. Wellens, but the bill had, kind of three components: the training for new recruits, cadets. We've obviously augmented that to now be at the end, which makes total sense, and I'm very supportive of. And then ongoing training for current officers, and then for executive leadership. Parts 2 and 3, and then the cadet program, right? So 4 parts. Parts 2 and 3 are not quite there yet, but you're working on them. So I wanted to allow you to talk about that at some point, I guess now. But that I agree with the approach that you took, which is the first step of the bill, to start with the incoming cadets and then build out. So you could just talk a little bit about the process and timeline for parts 2 and 3.
Certainly, and we're speaking about the continuing education.
Yes, continuing education, yes.
For officers. Yeah, so that's, something that we could have ready. So again, we began with 30-hour training because we were addressing the current needs, sure, right, of folks who are entering the academy. We've also focused heavily on the cadet program because recruiting is a significant need for the department and for the county. But we understand the need for continuing education. Our folks, our faculty who are working on curriculum development are very motivated to produce all components of this piece of legislation. So, if we're talking about either a 6 to 12 month implementation period, after the passage of the legislation, we certainly can be ready to deliver those components. Awesome. We get the green light, we move on to those phases 2 and 3.
You anticipated where I was going, because so it sounds, and I want to let Assistant Chief Frankie respond, but it sounds like you're ready to go on the cadet in spring, but the other one we just need a little more time. right?
So
The continuing education component.
the police officer candidates in the spring.
Yep.
The cadet, the program in the fall of 2023. Now, for the ongoing education, I will tell you and I want to recognize Captain Ian Clark, who's been leading this from our side. I want to emphasize some other things that are going on that are going to complement the work that Montgomery College is doing with us, and how we want to take that and kind of flourish even more. The ELE 4A audit report will be out in the coming weeks, and it indicated, in the preliminary report, indicated a need for a PhD deputy director to help lead our academy. We have looked at that extensively. The county executive approved the funding for that, so we're in the process of getting ready to hire this PhD, go through that process. What we envision with that is having another outside voice, academic voice, who's able to begin crafting our future trainings and our ongoing trainings even more. So that's going to affect the officers that are already in place. And what we want to see is a liaison between, we already have the liaison, but I think it's very important for this outside academic expert to then work with Montgomery College and take, in addition to the further development they're going to do for our current officers, but to see how we can implement that through our entire training product. We want to make sure that everyone, whether or not you come in the academy or you've been here for 15 years, 20 years, we're all sending the same message to all of them, and they're all getting exposed to it, whether that's going to be through in-service training or an additional training block that either our academy staff or our friends with Montgomery College recommend. So we're open to it, and we think both that collaboration there will really improve what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear, and I'm glad to hear that progress. And so just suggestion to the committee, based, that maybe you look at the effectiveness date, move it to a year. It's normally 6 months, and then that way it gives them time to comply with the whole thing. Or you could stagger it, but just a thought. But really happy to hear the progress and appreciate the update. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anyone else from the panel? If not, I'm going to turn back to Ms. Wellens.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think that's a good segue into potential amendments. On page 5 of your packet, it's under item number 2 of the staff memorandum. You can see an amendment to lines, or a proposed amendment for your consideration to lines 40 to 57, related to the timing of the 30-hour program, as was just discussed, and that it would be a prerequisite of the field training as part of the academy, as opposed to a prerequisite to acceptance in the academy. So that's there for your decision.
I'm fine with that. I don't know. You're fine with that. You're not voting this morning, but we do have a voter over there.
That's good.
And so yes, that'll be unanimous.
Great, thank you. And still on page 5 of the staff memo, under item number 3, there's a potential amendment related to the Maryland Police Accountability Act. As you'll recall, one component of that act is that relates to implicit bias training as part of a hiring process for police departments in the state. And the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission is required to develop a test and training for implicit bias, subject to the availability of implicit bias testing standards that are generally accepted by experts in the field of police psychology, require all law enforcement agencies to use the implicit bias test in the hiring process, and require new police officers to complete testing and training, and require incumbent police officers to undergo implicit bias testing and training on an annual basis. In order to, this is not inconsistent with the bill as it's written, but in order to incorporate those additional state requirements, there's a proposed amendment at the bottom of page 6, beginning of page 7, to essentially acknowledge and incorporate those state requirements into the bill.
I think that we have to, and I think it makes sense the way you've written it, so I don't know about anybody. Are you okay, Tom? Yes? Are you?
Yes, thank you.
We're good on that one.
Thank you. And lastly, in terms of potential amendments, on page 7 of the staff memorandum, item number 4, the Office of the County Attorney had recommended some clarifying amendments. And let me just go through them quickly because not all of them are still relevant. So one was simply a clarification to the definition of cadet or police cadet, indicating that this is a program for college students. The next potential amendment was changing a reference that was to recruitment programs, changing that to cadet program. Again, these are clarifying. The next amendments listed there, you would not want to do, since it's a clarification, but it's inconsistent with an amendment that you just adopted. So
Right, when you're saying the next, what number are you?
I'm so sorry. Okay, so the first two that are listed there, the amendment lines 12 to 14, that's the definition of cadet.
Okay.
Amend 33 to 39. So those two are good clarifications. Then the amend lines 42, I don't know why it says to 22, but this is regarding the, sorry about that, but this is the timing piece. It was a clarification to the provision about timing, but you've already amended that in a way so that this one is no longer relevant. So I probably should have taken that out, but in any case, so you could skip that one.
Okay.
And then lastly, and on page 8 now, there was a recommended amendment to line 45 to clarify that the program consists of 30 hours, not 30 credit hours.
Okay.
And that's it, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Yeah, we still obviously need that one. And I'm assuming that the police, as well as the academic world here, but everyone's in agreement that the way this is being written now is what you would feel that is the best way to go forward?
Yes, sir. Police would agree.
Okay. Good.
Good question.
Yeah, please.
Thanks. I don't know that this requires an amendment, but I'd love to, and this is so exciting that we've made so much progress, and I know how much work has gone into this. But can somebody describe for me sort of the evaluation process moving forward once the program has been implemented? How will both officers who've been through the training have an opportunity to provide input, and the community who is very engaged and interested in this process as well? And what process will we follow moving forward to incorporate that feedback as we're building this really important plan?
Just to set a stage for that conversation, Montgomery College continuously assess outcomes of every program that we offer. So this will be done in the same spirit, and certainly with collaboration with our colleagues in the police department. We do the same thing with our IT and a lot of other collaborative programs that we have across our offerings. So go ahead, Professor Robinson.
Thank you. So first, I want to acknowledge that the police are a part of our community. And one of the items that we have discussed is providing a first iteration of the 30-hour training program to our friends who are instructors at the academy. They may have some feedback that helps inform, the ultimate training that we deliver to officers. So that's the first point of connection. We are working on developing assessments. We intend to be highly reflective. There will be some sort of assessment on a daily basis for the officer candidates. There'll be county employees who work 40 hours a week at that point. This training is designed to run for 30 clock hours. We would like to have an anchor faculty present on campus. We certainly have facilities where the officers can utilize computers to complete their assessments, to conduct pre-reading, but we are looking at ways for them to take the content that they have learned every day to respond to prompts. Our faculty are working on developing a series of hypothetical police-citizen encounters. And the idea is not for us to necessarily tell the officers what the correct response or action in that scenario is, but to have them engage with the perceptions of the community and potential community impacts regarding those various scenarios, so that they have an opportunity to think, should I be faced with this ethical dilemma, or should I be faced with this concern that is issued by members of our community? How might I go about approaching it? I don't think that any of us want police officers to be thinking about these things for the very first time, right, when they hit the street. And I know that the police department engages in some of these processes already. So the training is really, it's designed to reinforce some of that. We've also engaged in dialogue with the Conflict Resolution Center of Montgomery County about the possibility of helping facilitate dialogue with members of our community to strengthen some of those active listening and conflict resolution skills. We have a series of guest speakers who we have started to identify, folks who have been impacted in ways both positively and negatively with respect to their interactions with the police. And we think having very grounded discussions, right, supplemented by the more formal instruction provided by our subject matter experts, is a great way to connect that theory to practice. And then at the very end of the training, we have a capstone project. This is our intent. And this is something that the officers will be working on throughout the course of the week. But we will select real-world scenarios facing community groups in Montgomery County and ask the officers to identify in group settings solutions that are community informed, that take into account racial equity, social justice, health and wellness issues for themselves, for the community, civic engagement, right? So we really do, we're calling this a capstone training, right? But this capstone project really ties together everything that they've learned during their, nearly 6 months in the academy, and then that time that they have with us to reflect back on everything that they've learned.
Thank you.
So certainly, the some of those aspects are important, but also looking at the impact of this training, how officers are performing in the community, and some community-based data will be helpful in this, and we will continue to work on that as well.
Thanks. Moving forward, I think it might be an interesting concept. The instruction in the classroom is going to be so important in the capstone, and I love that sort of real-world implication, which I know to some degree we already do. I think there may be a benefit. It just struck me, it's just an idea, but I worked in youth development for 4 years at this organization called Latin American Youth Center, and those 4 years have informed my entire professional career because, the interactions I had with the youth, the staff, were so invaluable. And while obviously we can't expect people to be in different organizations within extended periods of time, but there are already examples. So Officer Reyes and the work that has been done in the autism community. Yep. There was real intentionality in connecting officers with community-based organizations that serve the autistic community, and formal partnerships that have been in place for several years now. And it just strikes me that there are incredible community-based organizations that are out there on the front lines, and to the degree to which we can organize more intentionality and connection with those organizations as both to create opportunities of learning, to interact with the folks who are on the ground and already have some degree of trust within those communities. It's probably already being developed, I would imagine, within the curriculum, because it's not a radical idea. But I do think that sort of learning, that sort of interaction, beyond what is discussed in the actual classroom, the trust that's built through those connections, I think could be really positive.
And if I may add, Council President Albornoz, we do have an Institute for Race Justice and Civic Engagement at Montgomery College, and we have envisioned hosting community dialogues through that organization. It's something that can happen during the 30-hour training, but there is also the cadet program piece of this legislation where we have potential recruits, who are students at Montgomery College for 2 years. We have a community-informed policing seminar that we are working on developing as a part of that curriculum. And there will be an extensive amount of co-curricular activities associated with that as well. And those kinds of dialogues will be happening in that seminar, but also on a wider basis within the Institute for Race Justice and Civic Engagement. And they will be open to the broader college community, because it is important for us that these cadet cohorts come through as cohorts but are integrated within the college community and within the broader community as well. And we have one upcoming dialogue, two actually, planned for the end of October 26th and 27th, and we certainly would be happy to share the information with any of you who might be interested in attending, as well as our police counterparts as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Very good. Anything else?
Mr. Chair, just the effective date, if you wanted to
Right.
address that, the Councilmember Jondo.
There again, I don't want anyone to fail because of the effective date. We want this to be in place and working right. So your suggestion was a year, is that?
Additional 6 months, however you phrase it, because normally we're going to affect 6 months, right? Is that correct?
Well, we could also put a date.
The 91st day after the county executive signs it, so if you want,
So that's 3 months.
so that's 3 months, so what's the total?
Would that work for you before we come up with this date? Is that going to work? I mean, we don't want to put you all in a bind that
For the continuing education
Yeah.
piece, because you're on track for the other stuff, right?
I think we're good, sir.
you think we could put in something like on or before. If you're faster, don't hold it up for us.
Right.
But yeah, okay, if you could word that.
Right, and there would be nothing
And you're okay with that?
including faster implementation.
Yes.
And Councilmember Hucker, are you okay with that? Yeah. Okay, good.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So
Thanks.
it's on or before what? What do we?
Well, yeah, we'll have to-
ask that. So if it was 6, that would be the normal would be say this passes in sometime this month. Summer.
Well, if we said on or before 180 days, right, you said it would be the 91st day after it's signed.
Yeah.
So if we said 180 days, I mean, we don't know when it will be signed. I mean, we assume it gets signed fairly quickly, but could be,
Within 10 days after you
Yeah.
enact it.
So if we said within 180 days or before,
Is that okay?
and that's okay with you all.
I know we got to get you money for everything.
Yeah.
That's a separate process.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm assuming because the provost from Rockville is here, that are we looking at having it at Rockville, the grouping? Oh, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Very good. Thanks.
That's it, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay. So do we need a formal vote on this with the amendments, subtracting out the one amendment that shouldn't be there?
Correct, yes.
You move that, please.
I'd like to move what the chair just did.
Councilmember Hucker, would you agree with that?
I do, thank you.
Okay, very good. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. We have 3 hands up and 1 hand almost up. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here and for working with us on this important legislation. Go ahead, please.
Yep, and before you all depart, I just want to thank the committee. Thank you to the Montgomery College team, to the police department. As I said when we started this process, I'm really excited for the work that's been happening already and what will come from this, and I think it will be a national model. And I was really excited to hear Assistant Chief Frank, your desire in talking about extending the academy already, the PhD. I think this will complement very well with what you're already doing and will serve as a signal, as we all want it to our community members, the 600 plus criminal justice students at Montgomery College, other members of our community that might be thinking about it in high school or whatever, that we're thinking about these things in an intentional way, and this is part of who we want you to be. Good community-based police officers that understand all these concepts, and I know that's what we all want, and I think this is another signal, and I think this will be a recruitment tool. So I really appreciate that, and just want to thank the committee again. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to move to the second topic, which is an update on crime statistics. Ms. Farag will be handling that. Thank you. You need help too.
Try not to clip you on the
The next thing you see is me in a brace. Thank you. Take care. There we go. Okay, and first off, let me thank Ms. Farag for the preparing the packet. And as we begin, I'm going to ask for if anybody from the panel has any opening statements. But Ms. Farag, if you could also mention during, and I know parts of this were going to come up, about juvenile crime in Montgomery County. It's obviously something that's in the news more and more, and we need to hear what is going on with that. So, and with that, who would like to? Should I ask the panel first, Chief?
Good morning. Good morning to Mr. Katz and Mr. Albanaz, President Albanaz, and Councilman Hucker.
It literally is over your
Yeah, I know.
shoulder.
I'm trying to
He's
like all
your
over the
shoulder.
place.
It's tough.
Here,
It really is.
So, good morning. As stated earlier, I'm here this morning with Acting Assistant Chief Nick Augustine, who is taking over as the Investigative Services Bureau Chief, and I'm also here with newly assigned Captain Mark Ermey. He is the new director of our Criminal Investigations Division, which primarily does follow-up investigations for many of our crimes within the county. So we just are glad to be here this morning to talk about some issues as it's centered around our crime updates throughout over the course of the year. And as you noted about juvenile crime, I had stated earlier this year, really around the springtime, about my concern about the uptick in juvenile crime, not only as a result of individuals who were committing crimes, but also the victims, that many of our victims were juveniles of some of our more violent crimes that were occurring here in the county. And it was really a call to action, and I was proud to see many members of our community come collectively together, governmental institutions, as well as many other members of our community come together and call out, really trying to get the community to calm down from a sense of the violence that was occurring. So we have seen, and we'll talk about that this morning, we've seen some effective networking as a result of that, but we've also seen some significant police work that I'm very proud of our police department and the members of our departments who've really met the challenges head on to maintain some quieter neighborhoods in our communities. But we still have work to do, so I'll turn it over to Ms. Farad.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to briefly walk you through the packet, and I wanted to preface this by saying a lot of people are comparing Montgomery County experience to national trends. And there's some truth to that, but there's also some misleading falsehoods about that, because violent crime is being experienced differently across the entire nation. The FBI came out with its 2021 data last week, not in time for my staff report. They do have a warning that only 60% of jurisdictions reported, so it really shouldn't be taken that seriously. But if you look at FBI data, we are not matching that for 2021. Last year, FBI reports violent crime went down 1%, but ours went up 13% last year. Homicides nationally were up 4%, but ours were up 88% last year. And nationally, again, robbery was down 9%, but ours was up 4% last year. So there are some normal common trends. Elevated firearm violence is a problem in many, many jurisdictions. And as the Chief Jones had mentioned, juvenile crime has escalated, and also juvenile victimization of violent crimes has escalated. So I'm just going to briefly walk you through what's happening.
If I could just 1 second, part of the problem with statistics is that somebody will say, well, you had one this year and you had two, so therefore it's up 100%. Well, one was and every crime is a horrible situation. We don't want any, but sometimes statistics are not as fair a reflection as what's actually happening in a community. I mean, and so in the 60% or whoever who's reported to the FBI or whoever they're reporting to, are air statistics in that one? Is that, we are, so we do report.
Yes, we report our incidents of all of our crime stats to the FBI to be part of the national trend.
So then it becomes another question is why did someone not? Yes. Okay.
Because the FBI moved to a new system called NIBRS, and Montgomery County's been reporting to that system 4 years or so. They were ahead of the curve.
I see.
So, but the entire country is not. There's 18,000 police departments. Some of them have 6 to 20 police officers, right? So
Right.
it can be burdensome to smaller agencies to convert their data into this format.
Okay, very good. Please, I interrupted, but please go ahead.
So I wanted to start with violent crime. You made a good point. Statistics can be misleading. The department gave me all of the data, which is included on your circle number attachment. So you see the raw data as well as the percentage changes involved. For this year, the data goes through September 15th for 2022, and violent crime so far has increased 13% this year. There are significant variations based on offense, though. Aggravated assaults, for example, have gone up about 8% this year, and simple assaults have increased by a little over 16%. All forms of robbery have increased. Carjackings are up 19%, commercial robberies are up almost 70%, and non-commercial robberies are up 20%. Sex offenses have increased almost 55% this year, and overall weapons offenses have increased as well. On the other hand, within those subsets, large drops in violent crime have been seen in homicides, which are down 36% this year, kidnapping down 36%, and rape is down 21%. I generally ask for mid-year updates on crime statistics from the department, and they gave me crime stats through June 30th, and I thought it was very interesting to note summer violent crime trends since then, because they've now since then have provided me this update for September 15th, so I've got comparative data. It is much too short a time frame to predict any trends based on this experience, but I thought it was interesting to note that while violent crime is still elevated, it was actually slowing over the summer. For example, we had 14 homicides up through June 30th, but there, knock on wood, were only 2 through September 15th additional. So it is slowing a bit. Chief Jones might speak to that as far as some of his proactive policing initiatives are concerned. There's more data for you on page 3 of that. I also have a historical homicide chart. Again, we've had 16 homicides this year. On average, over the past 22 years or so, we've averaged about 18 per year. Last year was an outlier at 32. You also had that number back in 2002. I believe the highest homicide rate in the county was 34 back in 1994. So as far as homicides are concerned, the department has cleared 14 of the 16 homicides, either by arrest or by exception, and that's a clearance rate of 88%, which I thought was very notable. The clearance rate far exceeds the national average of about 50%, and actually that's dropped a little bit below 50% at this point. Robberies, again, there's information on those on pages 3 and 4. They've increased over the summer. Commercial robberies have driven a lot of the increase, although the police department did identify some suspects that were responsible for several back in the winter, and they've arrested them. They've increased again over this summer, unfortunately, and carjackings, that holds true for carjackings as well, which have increased 19% this year. the number of carjackings is averaging now almost 6 per month. As far as rape and other sex offenses, reports for rape have dropped almost 21% this year compared to the same time last year. But conversely, sex offenses have increased almost 55%. And the department's advising that this has been driven in large part to sex offense reports at the MCPS schools over the past calendar year. But I want to caution that those incidents are not occurring at the schools. They are being reported there when somebody feels there's a safe person to report that to when they arrive at school. Firearm-related crime, again, this remains a concern in the county. And while all violent crime is up 13%, firearm-related crime has increased by 20% this year. And that's being driven by aggravated assaults and robberies. There's a chart on page 5 to illustrate what's going on there over the past several years. Contact shootings are non-fatal shootings. They've also increased this year. We've had 41 total with 38 incidents. And that continues a year-over-year trend with 31 in each of 19 and 20, and we had 50 last year. And there's a map on page 6 that displays the locations of homicides by any cause, not just firearms, and contact shootings. And I do want to note there have been no homicides in the 3rd District, which is Silver Spring this year, although there have been multiple contact shootings there, particularly in the George sector downtown. Recovered firearms is also a concern. That's increased 29% from last year. They've recovered 918 weapons this year, and of those, 148 were privately manufactured firearms, also known as ghost guns. PMF recovery is up almost 200% from the same time last year. And to put a little context in that, last year the department recovered 1,192 weapons in all of 2021 and 71 ghost guns or PMFs. So I've also listed, just for you to take a look at, the police district data on page 7. Okay. But one of the things I wanted to point out in this conversation is racial disparities in the violent victimization. As I mentioned before, violence has been increasing, but not every community has been impacted equally. And historically, areas of concentrated poverty are more likely to experience violent crime. And I've illustrated that in the 2 maps shown on page 8. You'll see that the concentration of 2022 homicides and contact shootings closely match the county's equity focus areas. And for those who don't know, the equity focus areas are parts of Montgomery County that are characterized by high concentrations of lower income people of color who may also speak English less than very well. Of the 16 homicides we've had this year, 8 victims were black, 7 were white, and 1 was Asian. And the disparities are even more pronounced in this year's contact shootings. Of the 41 contact shootings, 25 of the victims were black, 12 were Latino, and 4 were white, and 90% were male. There's also a chart at the bottom of page 8 showing by age, and disproportionately the youth are being impacted by violent victimization and contact shootings. The 2 youngest victims we've had this year are 15 years old. And the reason...
In those cases, was the person... Were the people that were involved in those, did they know each other prior to the incident? Do we know how many were?
When you speak of the...
Right, they were not random is what I'm asking, right?
That's correct, yes. The majority of these incidents were individuals that we believe knew each other for the ones that we have been able to solve, correct? Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
So I wanted to stress, looking at the equity focus areas, for a couple of points. We talk about the direct costs of violence often, and that's the lost lives and the disabilities caused by shootings, lost loved ones. But there's also the indirect costs in areas where violent crime is increasing. People often don't go out as often. Businesses are at risk of closing. And in areas where kids see violence, or they have to modify their lifestyle because of violence to try to avoid it, you see academic performance dropping too. So the community safety piece of this for violence is foundational to every other quality of life measure that we look at as far as housing and education. And I just wanted to note that as the police do their directed, focused enforcement to proactively prevent violence, it will often occur in equity focus areas. In terms of nonviolent crime, that's up 1.5%. There's wide variations among the different types of nonviolent crime, and it ranges from a 31% increase in burglaries to a 34% reduction in identity theft. And just very briefly, drug offenses have gone up 56% this year, but there were very notable reductions in 20 and 21 due to the pandemic related reduction in traffic and person stops. And this year's total has already surpassed all of last year, but it is well below pre-pandemic arrest levels for drug offenses. Fortunately, opioid overdoses are down 23%, and that's just noting the ones that the police department has been notified about. And again, briefly, domestic violence is down almost 2%, and that might be something that the committee or joint HHS Public Safety Committee may want to look at in more depth, is to do a briefing on domestic violence in general in the county. And then I just wanted to ask Chief Jones to discuss some of his proactive measures that the department's been taking over the past year, bearing in mind that they have about an 8% vacancy rate in their sworn officers. They're down about 108 officers right now. They also have close to a 16% vacancy rate in their professional staff and their civilian staff, which does, provide significant support to the department and can also make their work challenging.
Chief.
So thank you, Ms. Farag. So clearly, with the impact of some of our staffing levels, we've had to make some adjustments and really look at some of our more specialized units that we may, when a vacancy occurs there, we may not necessarily be filling that vacancy because we know, first and foremost, our primary responsibility is to make sure that we have officers who can respond to 911 calls in our patrol divisions, and we don't want to hurt our district stations with the losses, tremendous losses of personnel. In order to be able to do that and to have high visibility patrols and other functionalities that they have in the midst of us having to again deal with on-scene responses of these types of events, as noted. So over the summer, and earlier this year, as noted, where Ms. Farag spoke about the large number of homicides that we had, as well as the shootings, and there was a culmination of those things in the Germantown area, particularly along the Crystal Rock Drive corridor, where we had some horrific homicides there, as well as additional shootings in the area. That was, that when we really were able to identify sort of the problem area or apartment in that complex, that we connected to not only guns and violence, but we also connected it to drug dealing. And so our officers did a really outstanding job of working with the community partners, particularly with the residents and the ownership of the leasing management company of that particular apartment complex. And then we put together an officer, a couple of the investigators put together really a complex case together. We're able to do actually a search warrant where we seized multiple guns from that particular residence and made multiple arrests. And since that has occurred in that particular neighborhood, the violence has gone down tremendously. And that's been a positive impact. We also had another area, the Gunners Branch area, impacted by homicide and shootings. And so Commander Palace from the 5th District put together a very elaborate strategic plan to actually have officers in a high visibility. He put his DCAT teams in those areas for higher visibilities, and we've seen somewhat of some of those cases, and the numbers go down there as well. As you know, we've had tremendous impact of carjackings throughout the county, but mostly the majority of our carjackings have occurred in the lower Montgomery County corridors, in the southern parts, in Silver Spring, in Bethesda, in Wheaton. You'll see that's where the majority of those events occur. In fact, we had one last night involving 3 17-year-olds from the District of Columbia that started in downtown Silver Spring, An officer spotted, I think, well, actually, it was further out on Georgia Avenue. An officer in downtown Silver Spring spotted the vehicle driving down Georgia Avenue. A pursuit was initiated. The vehicle actually went into the District of Columbia, came back out into Silver Spring. The individuals bailed out of the car, but we were able to, I believe, arrest 3 of those 4 individuals that were in the car. 1 got away. But that just goes to show you that that's consistently what we're working on when you're talking about averaging about 6 carjackings a month. And it's, again, that's a regional trend. That's not just something, I was speaking to my colleagues and my counterparts in Prince George's County and the District of Columbia. Everyone is experiencing that same trend, and there's still no rhyme or reason other than the fact that these individuals are these are crimes of opportunity, that they're taking advantage of people and still in their vehicles at gunpoint, literally, and violence is clearly embedded into that particular crime. But we have put additional resources in those areas. Officers are quite aware that these types of crimes are occurring, so they are on high alert when these types of crimes occur, as it was noted just to what occurred last night. One of the other things I would state that we've had where you're seeing an uptick over the past few months, particularly, has been commercial robberies. And earlier this summer, we had a couple of individuals who were believed to be we knew they were going to McDonald's restaurants in the drive-thru, and they were actually robbing the stores of their wares through the drive-thru and pointing handguns at them. This was happening not only here in Montgomery County, it was happening in Howard, in Anne Arundel, as well as Prince George's County. And we have been the victim of several of our McDonald's establishments have been the victims of these particular crimes. We initiated a county-wide, what we call special assignment team detail, to actually to put surveillance on a particular McDonald's that we believe that were in the high target area. The very first night that we initiated that surveillance, we were able actually to see a robbery in progress in the Four Corners area. And we were able to successfully arrest those 2 individuals without incident. So that, again, just goes to show you that when it is time for us to put really to focus on where these crimes are occurring, we have been very successful in some cases. We had another trend of an individual's actually still going into pharmaceutical pharmacies, I should say, particularly in many of our grocery stores. And these individuals are actually doing robberies in broad daylight of the pharmacists and stealing some of the controlled dangerous substances, particularly which they were targeting. And we had a trend going on in that. And earlier this year, we had a group of individuals that actually went into Leisure World, the Giant at Leisure World, in the middle of the day. But the officers had received some intelligence of the individuals who were involved in this. Again, we caught those individuals in the midst of doing that robbery when they exited the Giant. We were able to successfully arrest them, and the officers showed great restraint because those individuals were doing their very best to get away. So those are some examples to include. Again, when we look at some of the shootings that we've had, which is at an all-time high, whether we go to some scenes. In fact, we had one on Friday night in the Twinbrook area where we found 9 shell casings upon arrival on the scene. Actually, one officer actually encountered a subject with a gun. Find out it was the individual actually refused to drop the gun initially. Finally, he did drop the gun and he ran. We tried to locate that individual, but we're unsuccessful. But we did locate a ghost gun, which was in his possession with a 30-round clip in it. when he confronted that officer. So that shows you, again, that's just an example of the dangers that are occurring in our community. And as you can tell, with the statistics, we've seized 2 times the amount of ghost guns we seized all of 2021 already, and we're not quite done in our last quarter of the year. Last Friday, as an example, on my duty commander report, I believe there was seizure of probably 4 to 5 guns on one given night that was seized either from a traffic stop or some other encounter. And these are individuals who are not allowed by law to possess a handgun. This is what's happening in our society, and particularly in our county, and our officers are on a high alert, knowing that we're seizing more guns than I think that I've ever seen, and during the course of my career. So,
Well, first off, thank you and your entire department for everything you're doing. If there's additional resources, obviously additional resources is what's helping lower or considering considerable lowering of what we need. If there's additional resources that are needed, please do not hesitate. I know I'm only speaking for me, but I have a feeling I'm speaking for a whole lot of others, that we stand ready to work with you and give you the resources necessary. And I understand that staffing is a concern. Is civilian staffing, is it as difficult to recruit for civilian staffing as it is for sworn officers?
It is not as difficult. I think it depends on the type of position. If there's, one area that I would say has significantly been a challenge that this committee is clearly aware of, it's in our communications center. That's been really one of our biggest struggles of really trying to get an amount of people, because those are, it's a very difficult job. The hours are not conducive to the regular, 9 to 5. And it, again, it's unique in its own right. Long hours. So that's separate and apart. The other positions, we're not really having as much of a challenge, but we have to be competitive. And I think that's one of the things that we want to maintain as we are competing in many different areas, right? With different types of professional staff. That I call our civilian staff is to make sure that we're being competitive in pay and benefit, which I think benefits are great, but I think a lot of times in areas we're losing people sometimes to better pay. And I'll utilize that in the area, for example, in our crime, it may be our crime lab, it may be in the crime scene, our crime scene evidence text. There's a very competitive market in the Washington, D.C. area for those individuals. And that's a very crucial component to successful investigations, because it's one thing to solve a crime, it's another thing to prosecute and to make sure that we're getting these individuals prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and doing it well. So those are significant challenges. But as you note, Mr. Chair, as we talk about some of the resources that we need, I think from a policing standpoint, one of the things I have really sat down with my staff and said, how can we police smarter, and how can we find other technologies that will help us when we don't necessarily may have the bodies, but and one of the things you all did assist us with, and we're in the midst of doing now, is really putting together this violent crime information center that's going to help us. And I think in the world of cameras, in the world of license plate readers, those are the things that will benefit. They're benefiting us now in downtown Silver Spring, as an example, because we put more cameras down that are now visible. I think the community is aware of that, even in the nightlife, even though we still have some challenges. We do need more. I do believe we need more visibility in downtown Silver Spring, as an example. Because we brought this again, the county has brought a nightlife, to that particular area unlike ever before. And with that needs to be infrastructure, and that does need to have more police officers as we move forward, as that area will continue to grow. But in the midst of that, I think, again, there's the technologies that can also assist us. And we're developing a plan now that we can utilize those technologies in our crime fighting and helping to solve crimes in an efficient manner, in a fair manner, in that regard. And so that's where we're really kind of refocusing to some degree in the midst of still working through hiring challenges.
Well, again, thank you for all that you're doing, and we need to continue to be doing and that much more. I do know that in your talking about the various this weekend or a few days ago, Montgomery Village also had shots fired. I don't know whether how else to say it that way, but it's everywhere, and we don't want it anywhere. So, and then the whole thing for juvenile crime, as we started out, we know that juvenile crime is on the rise. I believe the state of Maryland has changed some of its laws on how you can and can't discuss things with juveniles, and we had in downtown Rockville, not very far from here, someone that was I guess carjacked, and it was juveniles, and that becomes another issue. How do we get our in that case? I believe it was not people from Montgomery County that did it, not that but how do we help our young people get into a situation where that will not be a reoccurring situation? So with that, I'm going to turn to Council President.
Thank you very much. Lots of questions, and thank you for the presentation. This is always sobering, but important for us to check in on a regular basis. And as Ms. Farag noted, this is only part of the story. These statistics and data are important, they're relevant, but the impact behind the victimization of each of these crimes is also very important to note as well, and the ripple effect that this has. Just recently, the postman in our neighborhood was robbed in broad daylight in Kensington. And this is a gentleman who's established a relationship with all of us in the neighborhood and community, and of course we care deeply about him. And the fact that it happened in the middle of the day when some children could have been around underscored sort of, just the nature of that. And so it creates this general feeling of unease. And of course the victim himself, this postman, and his family, but by extension the broader community. And so that is terrible. And I know that eyeglass stores have also been targeted with several incidences, one in Potomac, another, I believe, in Bethesda. And so these are, and brazen, in the middle of the day. And so that, it does feel like something has changed to some degree. And I know these ebb and flow. And I do appreciate all the efforts and the creative efforts that have been underway to counter the record number of vacancies that we've had in numerous police districts. And I know we've had to shuffle personnel to reflect what is happening on the ground, and we recognize that hasn't been easy. So we remain committed to taking steps, whether it's salary and compensation or the housing tax credit. We're open to any and all ideas that will help with recruitment and retention, including the conversation we had earlier to become a national model. But I did have a few questions. So in moving forward, it would be helpful to note, if possible, the percentage once the cases are closed of repeat offenders, because something that I've heard anecdotally from officers, and this is true of the entire region, is that there's a feeling, fair or not, that particularly with some of the juveniles that are committing some of these crimes, that it's not the first crime that they may have committed. And that's a breakdown of the system and goes beyond the ability of an officer on the front lines to be able to address directly. Because if the same person is continuing to come out and not getting the support that they need, or not being held in a manner in which is sufficiently accountable, then that's a problem. So I think, Ms. Farag, if we could track, if it's possible, the number of repeat offenders within these cases. Is that possible, Chief? Or?
It is possible. It's something, it's a statistic we don't necessarily have kept, we have necessarily kept in the past. It is, what we find in many cases, particularly when it comes to juveniles, is it's a very unique system in its own right. It's much different than dealing with an adult. An adult, of course, their criminal record is more widely known. And in the juvenile system, basically there are certain crimes that, may not necessarily be a physical arrest, as an example, or if it is, it may not necessarily be where the juvenile is actually the juvenile is simply turned back over to their parents as they await trial, and they go back into society, and they could reoffend in a very short period of time. In fact, we had an example of this just a couple of months ago, where we had a young man, unfortunately, who was literally a one-man wrecking crew in Poolsville, who basically committed burglaries of individuals' homes, stole their cars, and led police on more than one occasion, on several occasions, who led us on pursuits. And here's a 15-year-old who didn't have his driver's license, and also who had an issue with, even alcohol was involved as well. And we had arrested him on those occasions, turned him back over to his parents, only to go back out and reoffend. And it took really some behind the scenes, to which we normally don't get involved in, engagement with the Department of Juvenile Justice in order to try to get something done, because this young man was going to either kill somebody or he was going to kill himself by his behaviors. The writing was clearly on the wall, and fortunately we did have the assistance of the juvenile court to get involved and to really to bring that to a close for now. But that's an example, and that's where when we look at sort of these offenses, and when you really think about crime, that crime is now widespread amongst the majority of our population. There's a very small portion of our population who commit crime, and many of these individuals, unfortunately, not all of them, but many of them are reoffenders. And the courts, they address it as is presented. But what we do find is that in some cases, when we see some of our more serious offenses, where individuals who become involved in shootings and some of our more violent crimes, we see them as the reoffenders. Particularly when you look at some of the cases such as the carjackings, because we get these individuals that come from the District of Columbia. And many of these individuals might even be sort of court monitored, you might say, right? We find individuals often who have bracelets that are attached to them, but they actually are in violation because they're supposed to be under so-called house arrest, but they're actually out in our streets and committing more crimes. So to me, it's almost like it's a regional approach, not so much, but it also is a Montgomery County approach that we have to really kind of focus on, whether it's juvenile or adults. The reoffending is a major issue, something we talk about with Mr. McCarthy at the state's attorney's office often, about when you bring in the individual's past history of how that's impacting our communities.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I think that is worth exploring further, and to see what more we can do to provide the support necessary so that these youth do not continue to reoffend and often victimize other youth, as was noted. A couple of other just points or questions. So I guess focusing on carjackings, my understanding, and this came up with the commanders running back, that there are certain vehicles that for whatever reason are just targeted more frequently. In this case, it was a Dodge Charger. Is that accurate? And if so, I know these are crimes of they're not predictable. They go up and down. But are there any trends that might be helpful in some way that we could help inform the public in some way proactively on the preventative side?
Yeah, I pay attention to that, right? When we look at the types of vehicles that are being carjacked, right? And we look at, whether it's some high profile type of a vehicle. And sometimes that's the case. I think it's in really the hands of those who are making that decision about what kind of cars they want. And this is the uniqueness part of where carjackings are in today's environment. These cars aren't being sold, they aren't being stolen, or taken in this violent act, and then being taken somewhere and being sold, or the vehicle being taken apart for parts. That's not necessarily happening. What we find in some cases is that these cars are being stolen for the moment, driven around town, wherever town may be, and then dumped, in an area, and we find the vehicles, 2 days, 3 days later, abandoned somewhere. And so that has led us to really, sit here and talk about this often, about what is the motivation of these folks who are involved in carjackings. And sometimes it's almost like it's a crime of opportunity, in some cases, to get from place A to B, right? And then sometimes it's just the joy of it, that you can pull it off. And we have seen, where there's cases of, yes, high profile vehicles that are, more high end, but yet we've seen where, again, sometimes it's just about, we've seen some vehicles that are more of your, modest vehicles, right? That are just, they're good cars enough to get them from one place to the next place. And so I wish that we really could say, if individuals who are driving these types of vehicles be on high alert. But I would say this, that all of the community, everybody needs to be on high alert. Mm-hmm. Because again, it's that moment, whether you're at the gas station, whether you're at the ATM, whether, you're in a parking lot, you have to be aware of your surroundings, because unfortunately, this is what we've seen too often, is that, these individuals kind of maybe key in on, again, someone who may be vulnerable enough that they believe that they can overpower them in order to take their vehicle.
I appreciate that. And just a couple of final points. So in our last briefing, you had noted anecdotally, Chief, that there was some concern that cases were taking a little longer to resolve. Maybe there weren't as many tips coming in as had been in the past for whatever reason. I know it's anecdotal, and I'm not even sure how we can quantify this, if it's possible to quantify, but are you feeling that same, are your officers feeling that same sentiment, or has that improved at all?
So I'll speak to this. And I'll let Captain Ermey maybe, because he may have some insight. I will say I feel better today than where we were probably a year or two ago, as it relates to complaints. And the reason why I say that is, for example, you find now when you look at our homicide closure rate, that's higher than much higher than the national average. To say we're at nearly 100% closure for 2022 is a remarkable number. Now, all cases are different, but there are times we've had significant tips come in from the community, particularly high-profile cases, where we weren't getting them in the beginning, but now people are seeing that they see the value in, providing information one way or another. So in some cases, I think we're seeing an improvement in that. We still run into problems. I don't want to give this a false front, because we still go into some communities and we believe highly. And in fact, I was talking to my good friend, the commissioner from Baltimore, how they run into that so often. They have shootings, and you have people who know who were involved in the shootings, but don't want to come up and give us the information. And I think we still have detectives that run into those problems. We still have officers that when we go there, the victims are not cooperative, the witnesses are not cooperative. So I'll turn it over to Captain Ermey and let him chime in on that as well.
Good morning, Chairman Katzen, Council President Albanaz, and Councilmember Hooker. What the chief said is exactly right. I've been in my position for about 2 weeks now. However, prior to going to policy and planning for the last year and a half and working with all of the police accountability legislation with the chief and such to update our policies, I was in criminal investigations for about a year. And what we've seen is exactly what the chief has said. We're getting reluctancy upon those involved, even some of the witnesses. And that is a huge challenge for the investigators. But what I will say is that our investigators are phenomenal. And one of the things that I admire with them is taking nothing and moving towards solving the cases. We've not only do we have challenges with those involved or, victims and witnesses being reluctant to say anything. We also find it on the technology side with some of the corporations are also reluctant to help the police department in an expedited manner, like your Facebooks and Instagram. We put in the search warrants, and it may take some time to get back. And unfortunately, those may be the key pieces. Not saying they don't help us, but every police department is funneling to one area of the social media platforms, and that's where we get a lot of our information from. And unfortunately, that can take some time. So while we are also, while we're still working behind the scenes. Now, I will say proactively, our lab director, working with the chiefs and such, have been able to get more forensic abilities, and they've also streamlined their processes. Our new lab director went in and really looked at the processes. For instance, firearm-related crimes. They went and met with Baltimore City, who has an abundance of firearms-related crimes, to look at what are their processes in the labs. Are they just taking cases in and then they just work on as they come in, or are they using technology with, the ATF's NIBIN systems to help generate links and such? So although we do run into, stumbling blocks of cooperation, we're still able behind the scenes to use technology, as the chief was mentioning, and why it's so important for us to continue to upgrade our technology as well as our personnel in our crime lab, because it does take personnel to actually do the hands-on work, as the chief was talking about. So all that together, I'm still comfortable with the investigators being able to work the cases, but I will say that if we can get the community's involvement and that transparency and trust relationships again, it would help us, get these cases solved quicker. But I will say that the investigators, you talked about a couple of the recent shootings over the last few days. I will tell you, my investigators were working all weekend, trying to develop leads when the cooperation wasn't necessarily there. So, absolutely.
And thank you for that. And so I guess, the message continues to be, if you see something or know something, say something. Particularly it relates to these crimes, but also even the non-high profile cases. And the other thing I was reminded of before today's session is that we still want to encourage the public, if your car was broken into overnight because you didn't lock it, you should still report it, because there is information to be gleaned, particularly as it relates to trends, that's helpful to various districts that help officers keep an eye out. And if there's a particular uptick in certain neighborhoods, while resources aren't what we would like for them to be, maybe we're able to more strategically dispatch officers to those areas where there's a trend. So to the public at large, please continue to report these incidences, even if they're non-emergency, because I think it is helpful. I just want to give you I'm teeing you up here, and just if you can help reinforce that.
I thank you for that, Council President. Absolutely, because, for us, it really does matter that we have the information of where crimes are occurring. And a lot of times the public may not know that we're putting our resources in some of these areas where we know we're having high volumes of these types of incidents. But if they're not being reported, and people just think, I feel bad. I left my car unlocked. I shouldn't have done that. but you never know what part of a, like you said, what part of a trend you really are a part of. And we may, in fact, have found your property, for example. If you didn't report it, we wouldn't know. There's times we actually do come upon and arrest individuals who've gone through particular neighborhoods at any one given time, and we've actually placed them under arrest, and we've recovered stolen property from them, knowing it's stolen, but we don't have victims all the time because they didn't report. So we think that's really important, again, to help us identify trends and areas of concern throughout the county, because that's something we talk about on a weekly basis. So we know where we need to put our resources in order to focus on the different types of crime trends that we have.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Hucker, did you have any?
This very helpful. Thank you. A number of my questions were anticipated already. I'm not looking for a facile explanation here, but I didn't think we talked at all about the impact of COVID. And I think I remember last year this briefing, part of the explanation that was given for crime being down was the lockdown. And I assume that some of the rise, and it's not in every category, of course, has to do with fewer people being home, more people being out on the street, in conflict with each other, et cetera. But Chief or anyone, do you want to talk about to what extent that is an explanation, and should we anticipate that will continue to be the case? What you're doing about it?
Yeah. So, Councilmember Hooker, I think the reality has really kind of it's right in front of us now to see that we've come back to some degree of normalcy. Mm-hmm. People are going back to work, even though you still have some people who are still working from home, as we know, as a change, but. In many cases, a lot of people, we've gone back to a large sense of normalcy. Businesses are operating at their normal rates, and therefore, I think this is, before there were a limited number of businesses who were open, and so we weren't having the numbers of commercial robberies, right, for over the last couple of years to where we are in 2022, and burglaries are a prime example, right? Mm-hmm. Where we, when you looked at the burglary issues, it really was more centered around commercial burglaries. Now you're seeing a higher degree of not only commercial burglaries, but you're also seeing a higher degree of residential. Because when we were in the pandemic, people were home. So burglars weren't trying to break into your home while you were home. Now they know that people are not home, because we're back to this sense of normalcy. So now you're seeing the numbers kind of go back up to where we were pre-pandemic. And so some of those crimes kind of, just adjusted with the times, you might say. Now we do see that that trend has kind of changed a lot, and now we really have to change our focus on, now it's because it's post-pandemic, now we've got to kind of get back to where we were policing and trying to prevent crimes from happening the way it was in around 2019.
Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know if it's conversely or related, there was the big drop in traffic during the lockdown. We saw a rise in reckless driving. Has that abated now that there are more cars on the road as well?
So yes, that is correct. That has somewhat abated. We still have, you still have some issues with our. We get some of our I wouldn't call them car clubs, but groups of individuals that get together. We've seen some problems with our motorcyclists, where individuals are driving recklessly with motorcycles. But overall, as comparably to what we were seeing and what we talked about, and you would always raise about the reckless driving of cars. Yeah, because I think traffic has again gotten back to, I think it's normal. There's real rush hour now, right? So, and there's significant vehicles on our roadways. we're not seeing the amount of reckless driving that we saw as we did, during the pandemic.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks for everything you're doing. This is definitely very helpful, and thanks to Susan as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council President.
Yeah, I want to go back to the gun issue, which is, I know that we're all doing everything that we can. The council is trying to enact local legislation. We're working with the General Assembly. I continue to believe more guns is not the answer, especially as evidenced by the record number we already have in our communities. But Chief, could you just talk a little bit about that, or anybody else, sort of any strategies that we can utilize? And I know the city of Rockville, once again, worked on the buyback program. I always get worried about those because with the voucher, does that mean they buy just a more updated gun? So I know there's pros and cons to every approach, but could we just, what more can we do? And I know this is more than a 2-minute answer, and probably, Ms. Frog, once again, another extended conversation. But as we prepare for the General Assembly session in Annapolis this year, from a policy side, from a prevention standpoint, what are your thoughts?
So I am aware that the Office of Legislative Oversight is preparing a report for the council to discuss, really gun ownership and the gun laws here in the county, as well as the state. We have done our very best, and we will continue to monitor. I don't think we've come to any conclusions. The one conclusion I think that clearly has been demonstrated that many people, when we look at why are they carrying guns, particularly illegally, why is that occurring? And so, when you talk to individuals, they are telling our officers because they do it for their protection. They do it because they know that other people have guns. So therefore, they believe that they have to be there to protect themselves. And whether that means that they are carrying the guns on their person or whether they are transporting those guns in their cars. And again, we've seen, things such as I wouldn't say a typical, but simply a road rage incident will end up being someone pulling out a gun in order to try to resolve it. Now, whether they pull the trigger, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But the reality is that we're seeing that as a normal when that was a one-off, where that didn't always occur. And it becomes the debate about where people's minds are about how they think that what they must have in order to, quote, either protect themselves or demand control in any given situation. And so it's unfortunate because, again, I think it equates to us seizing more guns than ever before. And we're talking about illegally prohibited guns. And again, at a higher rate, we're finding, again, the ghost guns that we're recovering is a tell stories that there are more ghost guns in our community, right? Not that we are seizing every ghost gun that comes through Montgomery County. We're only seizing a fraction, and we don't even know what that number really looks like, right? We know that the capabilities of individuals to possess these guns, to get their hands on these guns, are incredibly easy, right? From the standpoint that, and I don't think at this point laws are deterring them, right, from trying to obtain them, because the states, each state, you can go to the state of Virginia as an example, and it's much easier to purchase a gun in the state of Virginia than it is in the state of Maryland. And so, there's other states that are the same. And I think that is something, as we in law enforcement know, it's really we are hard pressed, and that's a big barrier for us because we can't control, people coming across jurisdictional lines with that type of weaponry. And again, what is their purpose, right? Some people are, they may just want to, purchase them and put them in their homes and be law-abiding and never have a problem with it. But, any gun that's even in a home is a danger if it's in the hands of the wrong individual, whether it's intentional or accidental. And this is, again, what can we do? Well, we have to make sure that even if people are going to own these guns in their homes, that they need to be readily aware of the responsibilities that they have as a citizen to make sure that their gun is safe, in a safe manner, and that it's going to be utilized in any reckless manner or accidental manner for that way. And I know there's laws on the books to protect children, as an example, and that's important because, we have a new generation of people, right, that are now who may not be aware of those laws. So I think we as the county need to make sure that people are aware. If you do own a gun, these are the things that you could still be held responsible for if X or Y and Z happens. And I think that's an important message that we have to share as well.
Thank you. Last two thoughts, just very brief because I know we're over, but I have mentioned publicly before the concept of the creation of a position similar to the one Blanca King had, and that was organic, but so effective in helping to prevent crime and providing information that officers need and helping with victims, process the challenges of what they had faced. So I would like to, not now, but put a pin in on coming back to that issue as well. I think we're up to 3 or 4 now, but I think that's an important one and will not be cheap. But I think to the degree to which we can look at other preventative measures to not only keep these statistics down, but the ripple effect that they have on communities. And while this has been an incredibly sobering and important discussion, I'll end on a significantly lighter note. Chief Jones and I had the opportunity to attend a wedding together, and I can confirm this man's got some pretty good dance moves. So that was a lovely time and an important component. So we appreciate all of the tremendous efforts of all of you and your officers, and thank you for this update.
In this day and age of videos, everybody having a video, you didn't take a video of this? I think we need to have an update on that.
I think that's because he was too busy.
Yeah, he was. Uh-oh. Now the truth is coming out. But again, thank you all very, very much for everything you and your department does. You never get enough thank yous, but we sincerely appreciate it. Please, and we're going to have to come back, I don't know, every 3 months, 6 months, whatever our normal schedule is for updates on this. But if it is needed in any way for additional resources, we stand ready to do supplementals and to do everything else that is necessary so that you can help keep the public as safe as they possibly can. You use the term sobering. This is sobering, but the only way we can turn this around is to make certain that it's not strictly a policing issue. It is all issues. We need recreation. We need everybody else that's sitting at this table to help us get to the better place. So we stand ready to do that. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you for all you do. We are adjourned.
Thank you.